you now have, after a series of meetings in Russia between Wang Yi, top diplomat, and Russian officials, you also had Gang there as well in Moscow, meeting with Sergei Lavrov. Now you have Putin and Xi, Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, Xi Jinping, president of China. Xi Jinping is going to go to Moscow, meet with Putin, and it's coming in the context of a lot of developments that have transpired involving China and China's leadership from Munich, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia deal. Let's break them up a bit. Let's talk first about the upcoming Xi and Putin meeting that's about to happen in Moscow. What are your thoughts about it? What are how have you been following this development? Just your overall reaction.
Well, it's interesting because you'll still hear a lot of people in the West, and I honestly don't know what's going on inside their head, who think that somehow China is some kind of impartial observer and they're not involved in any of this, and they're just maybe they're being cynical and taking advantage, or maybe they just want to play peacemaker. But China is fully aware that after Russia, they're next. As a matter of fact, it's not even after Russia, they're next. It's already taking place. It's been taking place for years and years. The U.S. has waged proxy war on China in a multitude of ways, including killing Chinese people all around the globe with U.S. proxies. So they know that their self-preservation is tied to Russia's success in Ukraine, and they're going to see that through, and they're doing it very carefully because they really do believe in the idea of upholding international law, not just norms and rules, but the law. And so they want to be very careful about that because they know it's a slippery slope. Once you undermine it once you make an exception once, then you're tempted to do it again and again. So they want to do it very carefully, and they are. But the United States is not leaving either Russia or China any other possible alternative to do this. They are so bent on getting both Russia and China they really have no choice but to work together against this. And as I've had Mark Sloboda and Carl Zah on my channel, and they've talked about the current ties between Russia and China and the history of Russia and China. And they actually have a lot in common. This isn't just about working together against a common threat. They already have so many reasons to be working together. This is just added on top of all of that. And I think people really underestimate how close and how much is involved in this alliance. And it spans everything from culture to history, to economics, to now possibly military cooperation. So this upcoming meeting, I checked RT because it's Russian media, and they talked about something of a military nature being discussed. We don't know what, but something's going on there. I think we just have to wait and see. We could see that both Russia and China, they are patient. They, again, just like on the battlefield, they're patient, they're methodical, they're doing things incrementally. They're not in a big rush. I think they realize time is on their side. It's the U.S. that is rushing through all of this and I would say making mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, can't disagree with that. And I think too, to stay on this China in Russia with regard to Ukraine. What are your thoughts about how China has gone about this? Because they propose what is really a call for parties to cease hostilities, begin to negotiate a peace settlement, and begin to take each other's interests seriously. And so I think one thing that stood out about China's neutrality is that from day one, it stood by Russia's legitimate concerns and has never dropped them, meaning that, if any country does that, then they are, in fact, in contradistinction to what the United States and the collective West is doing when it comes to diplomacy, and ultimately when it just comes to this conflict. But you also have Xi Jinping. This is a pretty big statement. This is going to be the first foreign visit that Xi Jinping makes since the COVID-19 pandemic, and with a world leader. and it's going to be Vladimir Putin. And it also comes after this peace proposal was publicized by the Foreign Ministry of China. You had Zelensky saying, I'm going to meet with Xi Jinping about this. And now you have China and Xi Jinping saying, well, okay, we'll have a phone call with you after our meeting with Putin. I mean, what do you think about these developments? Because I think that it really does show where China stands. China is very good about adhering to rhetorically and in its actions, as you said earlier, the UN Charter National Law. But obviously, China is also navigating what is a conflict, what is this great power confrontation developing, led by the United States. It's navigating all of that, which of course is in contradistinction to international law. So you see China moving in this way. How have you seen, like, what's your opinion about this? I thought that was one of the most interesting developments. Zelensky publicizing, and we're going to meet, the media going crazy about it. Oh, Zelensky's going to be with Xi. It's amazing. And then, of course, no, actually, Xi Jinping's going to meet in person with Putin and perhaps have a phone call, video call with Zelensky at some point afterward.
Well, again, I think China is well aware that this is a proxy war and that no decision is being made in Kiev except maybe the lighting in Zelensky's studio. I think that's about it. And so what would the purpose of going to go meet Zelensky, or Zelensky going to go meet the leadership of China? It would only play into what the U.S. is doing. So I think they're well aware of that. They understand that there's many different dimensions to this because of different points of view. You know, the Western public, a lot of the Western public is still buying into this narrative that this is a Russian war of aggression against a victimized, innocent Ukraine. And they understand the idea of international law, but they also understand that this is a proxy war waged against Russia that is ultimately part of the proxy war being waged against China. And its self-preservation has to come first. And they're trying to be as careful as possible about preserving their existence while also trying to meet all of their obligations under international law, because they're thinking into the future. We see the US and Europe burning all of their bridges now, cashing in all of their chips right now. Russia and China are trying to think into the future. Once this is over, everyone's got to cooperate again. And we're going to want to do that in a framework governed by international law. So they're doing all of these different things, and they're trying to navigate all of it. But I think self-preservation is going to is going to be the priority.
I know we can't see into the minds of Xi Jinping and Putin, and we can't predict what will happen. Do you think there's any chance that out of this meeting comes a concrete proposal of action steps to begin a peace process around the Ukraine conflict?
Well, even for Russia, they've never ruled out negotiations. They were attempting to negotiate with Ukraine since the very beginning of the special military operation, and all along they're open to the possibility. And I think that's part of what China is doing also. They want to keep this door open. Just they know that the United States is never going to take advantage of it, but it will be there so that at the very end, when this is all finally resolved, however it's resolved, both Russia and China can say that all along we said we were open to negotiations. All along we had this peace plan, and you are the one that decided not to take advantage of it. And when you look back at all of the different proposals going all the way back to the Minsk agreement, Ukraine had every possibility from the very beginning, even after the U.S. interfered in their internal political affairs, to maintain the complete territorial integrity of what Kiev considers Ukraine. And they decided not to. And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse each time they slap the hand of negotiation away and they choose to continue this proxy war.
Yeah, indeed. So now I'd like to talk about what's happened in between this development, like as we lead up to the Xi Putin meeting, and as China has inserted itself, commenting on the 1-year anniversary of the conflict with its position paper for peace. And of course, the big news around this is the Saudi Arabia-Iran agreement that was brokered in Beijing. It's been downplayed in the Western mainstream media, hasn't gotten much attention beyond the day that it occurred. There's been some back and forth about the potential consequences of this. How do you see this? I think it seems pretty monumental, and it certainly is not without context. What do you think people need to know about this?
I think people should understand that I believe that Saudi Arabia has been more of a hostage of the United States than an ally for the longest time. Maybe there was a certain period of time where Saudi Arabia was getting some kind of benefit from this relationship with Washington, through the petrodollar and everything, but that has long since passed. And increasingly, as the U.S. empire is in decline, they're going to try to seek to get their vassals to pay the price first before they have to pay the price for their declining empire. And so you saw them putting pressure on Saudi Arabia to launch these proxy wars against Syria, against Yemen, against Iran through Yemen in many ways, and to maintain this animosity between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And a lot of people like to believe that this is about religion because they're two different sects of Islam. But in reality, if you look at some place like Syria, all of these different groups of Muslims can get along. They can fight together shoulder to shoulder. That's how past these differences they can go. And so this was entirely artificial. And in many ways, because the U.S., its economy depends on the petrodollar, they were surrounding Saudi Arabia with hostility, an unstable environment where Saudi Arabia needed to maintain this relationship with the United States for its own self-preservation. And I think they've sought a way out from under this oppressive shadow the U.S. casts over them in the entire region. And I think both Russia and China have offered them that exit, and they've taken it. And they've been doing this over a long period of time. I think if people were following this, they would see news stories spanning years. Yeah. Everyone getting ready for this transition, including Iran. Iran has been very patient. Why were they patient? Because I think they could see light at the end of the tunnel. And so now here we are. And again, the entire region is being transformed and stabilized to make this possible. And we have to say that now things are looking much more stable than they were in 2011, for sure, or all the way back to 2003 when the U.S. invaded Iraq. And that is what's happening. And then what impact does this have on, say, the petrodollar? I think it's huge. I think it's just even kind of hard to tell how this is even going to play out, but it's major. Because now Saudi Arabia is going to be dealing with Russia, with China, and many other nations that are. You see, the U.S. is sanctioning everyone and trying to isolate everyone, and in reality, they're isolating themselves. So this is going to blow up in their face, just like the EU and their sanctions against Russia.
Yeah, and the significance of China being the center of perhaps one of the most consequential for the region and the world of diplomatic achievements over the last generation. I mean that seems to be a huge kind of elephant in the room that the United States and the collective West don't want to deal with. To have Saudi Arabia in particular, it's not so surprising that Iran would lean on China to help broker such a deal. But for Saudi Arabia to make this decision comes on the heels of a lot of developments, Brian. The China-Arab Summit late in 2022, and of course, Saudi Arabia's interest in joining the BRICS Plus mechanism. What's your take on not just how Saudi Arabia has kind of moved since the Ukraine conflict politically in aligning itself in a more open manner to multipolarism, but also China being at the center of all of this. I mean, really, it's kind of the elephant in the room that the collective West likes to avert their attention from.
It's a really good point, because the West is acting as if this is some kind of anomaly. How is China taking over this role from the United States. But when you think about it, China has the largest population in the world. It has either already does or will soon have the largest economy, one of the largest militaries. Geographically, it's very large. It has its own wealth of resources. And then on top of it all, it is the largest trading partner of virtually every country on Earth. It has the largest industrial base by far. I forget how many times larger than the US it is, but it's much larger. And so it only makes sense that, say, Saudi Arabia, who's their largest trading partner? I almost guarantee that it would be China. And that's the case for so many nations. And in the few instances where that isn't the case, I would say that's the anomaly. And so it makes perfect sense for China to surpass not just the US, but the collective West. In terms of just look at the percentage of the global population the US constitutes. Does it even make any sense that they're the global leaders? The answer is no. It makes sense that China would be playing this role because they are the largest and they are the most influential and they have the most practical means to change the situation in any given country. We see this through their Belt and Road Initiative. They build things, in essence. They don't just play games with words and numbers on ledgers like the U.S. has increasingly done over the decades. They still have a real economy, and people want to connect to it. So it makes perfect sense that Saudi Arabia is making this pivot. It would have happened anyway, but the U.S. is accelerating it because it really has become a hostage situation between not just Saudi Arabia and the U.S., but so many nations that consider the U.S. an ally. Or not. Oh, look at Germany, for example. I mean, talk about a hostage situation. They literally blew up that pipeline to prevent Germany from getting out from under U.S. subordination, basically.
Indeed. Yeah. And, I think what's so interesting here, too, is that China talks a lot about even on that point alone, population-wise. So when China has a lot about democratizing international relations, democratizing the way that the world order operates in terms of everything from diplomacy, conflict, all of it, to democratize it, economics. Do you think that's what China was able? Do you think China was living, embodying that through this Iran-Saudi Arabia deal? Because on the point alone that you made about population and just what role China should be playing on the world stage is very, I think, accurate. But then you add into how China is actually behaving as a world leader. And I've called it leading by example rather than leading by imposition.
It's a really good point. And a lot of people worry that China is just going to replace the United States as the next overbearing and aggressive hegemon. But I don't think so, because look at how China is on the rise. It's not on the rise by invading other countries, stripping them of their natural resources, dictating to people how to run their own internal affairs in their own country. It's the exact opposite. They go into a country, they're doing business, and then they're also building infrastructure. And when you build physical infrastructure in another country, you are giving them the ability to generate more wealth, to have more power. And what you see is a balancing of power around the globe that had been concentrated deliberately so in the hands of the West. And they did that by deliberately not building infrastructure. I remember going through Laos, and I'll tell this story a million times because it's a perfect example of how this whole process has taken place. When I went through Laos, I saw Chinese companies building their first major highways. And then after that, they were building the high-speed railway. And before that, they had just these tiny winding roads going through these mountain passes. It was horrible. It took 4 days to go from Kunming to Vientiane, the capital of Laos. Didn't have any trains at all. And then you go to the capital, Vientiane, and you see all of these Western NGOs. And what they do is they go around the capital, which at that time still had dirt roads, and they were hanging banners telling the people there, don't use too much electricity. So that is their mentality, is to keep these countries impoverished, to keep them down, to divide them against each other internally and against their neighbors regionally. And that is the way the United States, being a minority among the global population, can maintain control over everyone else. Because if everyone else was developing normally, the United States would simply have no way to impose itself on them. China's not interested in that. I'm here in Thailand. They're Thailand's largest trade partner is China. Second largest trade partner is the United States. Only the U.S. is meddling in Thailand's internal political affairs, putting violent mobs in the streets, telling Thailand how to run their foreign policy. That's the U.S. That is not China. And that's not how they're doing business anywhere. And then maybe I'm kind of rambling here, but also the Chinese military, the way that it's growing, it's an immense country. It should have a correspondingly immense military. But the way that military is being developed is to defend Chinese territory, not project military power around the globe. And it's funny because if you read U.S. policy papers about any sort of upcoming conflict with China, they're quite happy about the fact that China really doesn't have the ability to project military power around the globe like the United States can. And that tells you a lot about the mentality in Beijing and what their motivations are and the type of system they are trying to set up or influence.